My name is Leland Hedgecock Smith. I and my wife Michelle are clockmakers on the Atkins Historical and Museum Complex in Mardela Springs, Maryland. I began doing my clockwork when I was 11 years old. I had broken my grandmom's clock, and I took it to a local clockmaker. I was hoping he'd fix it for me and let me pay him weekly out of my paper route money, but he said no. He said if I'd come after school and on weekends, he would teach me how to repair my grandmother's clock. And from that point, it took about 6 months. From that point on, I just kept going. And he kept teaching me. I would do the work that I was capable of doing for him. And he would teach me new work as it came into the shop. My dad was with AT&T, and he was successful, so we transferred about every 2 or 3 years to a new city. And I would go wherever we were. I'd go find a local clockmaker, and I'd show him what I had learned. And he, in turn, would say the same deal. After school and on weekends, he would teach me what I haven't learned yet, and in exchange, I would do my work. I received a very good informal, but a very good apprenticeship through 3 different clockmakers from the time I was 11 until I was 17. When I was 17, I completed my first clock mechanism that I made each individual piece by hand. And that was the natural completion of an apprenticeship with a master craftsman to build your own clock. What I like about the wooden geared clocks, and what's always attracted them to me, is its sound is vibration, and the sound of metal through metal, or a metal mechanism components through the voice box of a casing, is very different than the sound of a wooden geared clock, and its voice box being the casing. And a wooden geared clock gives you a tone and a softness that those metal mechanisms do not. They often call these pieces groaners, because when you're winding them, you have metal components rubbing on metal components, and you get a grinding, wheezing sort of a sound. I used to be able to lay in my bed at night of my house, and it's a large old farmhouse. And as I was laying in bed, I could direct my focus on each and every one of the clocks throughout the house. The 5 and 6 that were in the living room, the 4 or 5 that were in the dining room, the den, the kitchen, and then I'd go up the stairs through the hallway, and I'd focus in on the beats of each and every one of those clocks, and then I'd go around the rooms of the upstairs. And when I woke up in the morning, I would then go downstairs and wind the ones that I couldn't hear. And one of the great ironies of my life is that I'm a clockmaker who has absolutely no concept of time, nor do I care much about what time it is. So all the clocks that are in my home, we keep them wound because we want to hear the sound of their beats. And every once in a while they'll strike, but we don't really care if it's striking 10 times at 2 o'clock or 12 times at 1. It strikes whenever they want to. We just want to hear the sound of their beats throughout the house. We live in a region where there's some beautiful collections. We're here in Maryland, but our work extends up and down the East Coast and as far over as the Mississippi. And we care for a lot of beautiful collections of clocks. And we've had the opportunity to work on some very big name clockmakers, restore some beautiful old 18th century and 19th century pieces. And the variety is just startling. The British pieces, the French pieces, the German pieces, the American pieces. And so many people who own these clocks have no idea of what they truly have. The first thing they usually say is, "I love my clock, it's so beautiful." Their clock is the mechanism that's inside of that box that they think is so beautiful. And we're able then to show them their clock. Our workshop, because we are part of the museum complex, is very open and very accessible by people. And they can sit at the workbenches and see their work being done. A lot of people have family histories of their clocks, whereas the actual history of the maker and the piece that they own unfortunately clash terribly. And we're able to give them the true history of the maker and of the clock. More often than not, we can then reassociate it to the proper member of their family, their proper ancestor, and pick up the correct story. But the pieces that come through to us, often museum quality, often very beautiful. And then at the same time, they're the simple, common, everyday clocks, where the family stories is what make them far more special than any other clock could be to that family. We had an old kitchen clock brought in here one day, and it belonged on a farm south of Easton. And the woman who brought it to me told me how her grandmother has saved up Calgon soapbox tops. And she sent away and received that clock in the mail. Living on an old dirt farm on the eastern shore at the turn of the century, it was dusty, it was hot, it was isolated. And the day that clock came in the mail was Christmas, birthday, Mother's Day for that woman. And it was a proud part of that household's possessions, often their very first clock.